Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to be going over an example solution to the Spectrum project. Remember, your solution may not look exactly like mine as far as sizing and color choice, but the overall idea is hopefully similar enough that you can follow along with these solutions and reflect back on your own work. Let's jump to our editor and browser to get started. Okay, so here I am with my editor open. I have two files, project.css and project.html. They're empty right now. Here is what we're trying to recreate, something that looks similar to this with our own color palette choice and our own custom font choice. And right now I have this project.html. I just refreshed it so that it's clean and there's nothing there. Let's get started by working on the HTML. The first thing I'm going to do is just type HTML and we'll call the title of this project. And we also want to make sure that it's linked to our actual style sheet. In our case, that's just called project.css. And that's all we have to pass since it's in the same directory. And then for the body itself, I'm going to give a heading 1, and we'll call it my Spectrum project. And then let's make a table. So we'll make a table. It's going to have one table row. And if we look back at what the solutions look like, remember we have one table row with essentially 5 cells. So I'm going to call TD, and I will copy and paste that 4 more times so that my total is 5. And if I want to actually reference stuff here, it might be useful to give the table a class that I can reference later. So let's give it the class something like art. And for the table cells, let's give them each an individual ID. That way I can assign them each an individual color. And we may not use that class, but it's just there in case we need it later. The IDs we will definitely use though. So we'll give each of these their own ID. And we'll label this 5. So let's save that. Come back to project.html, refresh, and I see my Spectrum project, but the thing is, all my table cells are empty. So let's come to CSS and assign them overall something to make sure that stuff is working. So let's give them all a background color of black. And if I refresh this, I won't see much. I see essentially 5 little tiny cells there. You may not even see them on your screen. So what I have to do is expand the size of these. So let's continue doing that with something like giving these table cells a height. And let's give them a height of 200 pixels. Whoops, that should be a colon. Save that, refresh, and now I can see they're a good height. All right, the next thing I want to do is actually give these table cells a width as well. So let's do that. Let's give it something like 100 pixels. That should be fine. And then refresh over here. And now I can see my Spectrum project is starting to look similar to what I have here. And we can mess around with the size of the height and the width if we want to make it larger. So if we want to just expand this a little bit so it's a little nicer, there we go. And what I want to do also is start to grab that heading 1 and text align it to be center. Let's refresh this. And now we're getting to really think of something that looks like closer to the Spectrum project. Something else we notice here is that the table itself isn't centered. So let's try to use the margin on auto to do that. So I can use that class I used earlier, or I could also just call it table itself since it happens to be the only table there. And we'll just call auto. Save that. And now I have a centered margin here. And remember, the margin is the outside, the very outside of the box model. So let's review what we've done. We've been able to create our table cells. We have the art class here, which allows us to just grab, if we go back to the HTML, that entire table. So I could have also just called table, but I want it to be a little more specific in case we have multiple tables here, and use margin auto to center it. And I've also text align center that heading 1. So everything looks good here. Now what I'm going to do is come to this coolers.co and actually grab some of these hex codes. I went ahead and just grabbed basically a random color palette, and I'm going to copy and paste these text codes. So let's copy each of these. So there's my first one. There's my second one. Third. Fourth, and let's grab the 5th one. And we have to make sure each of these starts with that hashtag. There we go. So those are my hex colors. And the way I can assign these is by calling the IDs. Remember, we gave each individual table cell an ID, and eventually we'll be able to get rid of this background color black. So let's do that. Let's go hashtag 1, and we'll call the background color for it to be this very first. Let's refresh this, and we can see we're beginning to override some of these TD colors, because if we remember about CSS specificity, the ID is going to be in the hierarchy or above the hierarchy of just a normal element call. So let's call background color again, and let's keep doing this for the rest of them. And if you want, you can basically fast forward through this because I'm just repeating myself here. So let's exit that, or copy that, excuse me. Semicolon, and we're going to do that 2 more times. For the 4 class, give it a background color. And let's do that again for 5 class. Or 5 ID, excuse me, I should have been saying ID, not class. And then let's paste in these colors here. Copy and paste that color there. Alright, so let me save that, refresh this, and now I can see my Spectrum project is looking pretty good. I have the colors lined up, and they're overriding this TD call. In fact, I can just delete that, save this, and it'll still look the same. Now I want to affect the spacing in between these. If we look at Spectrum 5, there's a little more spacing here in between these actual table cells. So to do that, what I can do is mess around with the box model. And remember, an important part of that box model is the actual border. So a quick way to do this would just be to give each table cell a white border. So I'll say something like border, and give them each, let's say, 6-pixel solid white border. Save that and refresh. And here we get the nice spacing out that I was looking for. And finally, I want to add my own custom font to the heading 1. So I already have Google Fonts opened here. I'm going to just scroll down to a random one. Let's say something this one looks nice, is Anton. So we'll add that. The family selected, we'll open it up here. I will copy this, put it as a link in my HTML file, save it, come to Project CSS and copy the font family call and put it under H1. So now when I refresh project, I can see my Spectrum project now has that new font. And that's really all you had to do for this project. Again, hopefully you had enough practice with the box model so you can play around with this. You didn't have to do it with the border. You could have messed around with the margin and padding as well, but it's really up to you. There were multiple solutions to getting something to look like this. So do not worry if your solution did not follow mine exactly. There are multiple ways to get something that looks like this. If you have any questions, feel free to post them to the Q&A forums, but hopefully you had a fun time recreating something that you just saw the front end and you could recreate it using HTML and CSS on the back end. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you at the next lecture.